Yo! Hold on. Cheers and salutations. Welcome to Chicago Reacts. My name is Kit. Please be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. All you lovely, beautiful, outstanding people. You hip, cool cats. We return back to something quite awesome. Star Wars versus Warhammer 40K. Episode 18. A Blue Blade in the Dark. Where we last left off, I have to tell you, you know what? Star Wars, you kind of earned my respect with Ahsoka. And we'll see what happens with this Blue Blade in the dark. But listen, this was made by a fan. It was too much time, so if you don't gotta get it, if you don't get it, you better go figure it out. So please support the original content creator. That link will be found in the description box below. And for all the videos we do here for Chicago Reacts, please, you hip cool cats, support the original content creator. It's the right thing to do. It's the one thing to do. And I expect all you lovely, beautiful people to do it. So without further ado, since I am in charge of the ones and the twos, let's get ready to play this video in a 3, 2, and an uno and out. Let's enjoy this video and check it out. And enjoy it. As we should all the time. Every time. Cheers.
Safran and Delis stomped down, the force of his falling foot sufficient to crush Ceramite into powder.
Yes!
The Jedi beneath him, a young human woman with black hair and pale skin, threw her hands up, shielding herself with her arms, eyes wide with helpless panic.
That's the Jedi killer! I mean, Kit, don't you remember your lessons? Be nice. Maybe.
Olenna! Yelled another one of the Psyker warriors, thrusting his hand forward, shoving her, sending her skidding away just before the armored foot of the Space Marine fell onto her frail body. Safran turned to face the interloper, a brazen man with defiant blue eyes which burned brightly with the reflected light of his azure blade. The librarian grinned at the man, raising a hand crackling with power. But drawing it back a fraction of an instant later, the limb barely avoiding the touch of 3 more sabers as the Jedi Knights regrouped after his last scattering
Kill him, Space Marine! Kill him!
Attack. He kicked off from the ground, reversing the pull of the ship's artificial gravity with his mind, adding to the speed created by his superhuman muscles and powered armor. The recovered Jedi poured into the place he had been like a living, flowing stream of robes and shimmering blades of light. They bounded after him, leaping with eerie silence, each one a Calambian shadow cat, bearing their luminescent fangs as they gave chase. In spite of his measures, they reached him before his feet could connect with the domed ceiling above them, falling upon him like neon rain. The librarian extended his soul, the probing tendrils of his thoughts colliding with the many tranquil surfaces of the minds who sought to end him. They were slow and weak, but given that, their attack was without flaw, and he was forced to act defensively. He swept his force stave out in a wide arc, invisible energy riding the blow and empowering it. Those he struck all managed to get their sabers between themselves and his ruinous staff, but none, not a one, managed to hold their skyborne positions. Instead, those hit were sent flying, hurtling in all directions from the sheer force of the blow. The Space Marine spun the staff back around in time to catch 3 more strikes on the haft of his weapon, pulsing a psychic scream into the warp around him. Some of the Jedi reeled in response as his feet connected with the thick, transparent dome of the ceiling.
Come on, Psyker. Kill those Jedi filth.
Grounded, he extended his hand and clenched his fist, releasing a rolling smite into the many Jedi who were milliseconds from falling upon him. His bald gauntlet seemed to explode with crackling power, tendrils of warp lightning spiraling out from him, branching and splitting hundreds of times as it filled the air between he and his myriad foes. But of the many, many Jedi struck, only 3 burned, their screaming forms falling away towards the
Good. Kill them. Kill them all.
ground as the others caught the tendrils of warp energy on their lightsabers. Those lengths of light seeming to hum and harmonize with the warp itself. Safran grit his teeth, swiping his staff at the knights and masters who attempted to land atop him, alien power swords leading the way. He thwarted all but 2, the others choosing to land somewhere further away, their own feet adhering to the ceiling much as he seemed to. The 2 sabers which struck him did not breach his holy armor, but rather reduced the glow and strength of the aura he had shrouded himself within. The golden glow diminished, and he punished the 2 offenders for their hubris. The first, a brown-haired woman with several dots on her head, he caught by the ankle as she tried to leap over him, kicking off from his chest.
Now break her leg like a chicken leg. I'm sorry. You can tell whose side I'm on. I mean, what?
After delivering her strike. Simultaneously, he struck at the second with his force staff. The woman in his hand screamed as he crushed her bones in his gauntleted fist, keeping hold of the ruin of her leg as he belted the other with attacks from his weapon. The second offender, a silver-eyed man with a silver cast to his skin, revealed his inhuman nature almost at once. His limbs waved oddly, weaving with his movements like the rolling motions of an alien ocean. He avoided the first 2 strikes and parried the next 2 attacks with his red-hued purple blade. The odd, impish Xenos warrior smiled widely at the Astartes, rolling back into a more standard combat stance and fanning his own fingers, gesturing the Imperial Psyker to bring forth what he had.
Oh, you'll regret that, you foul alien. We offer you annihilation. We offer you your salvation. Your annihilation.
Safran did so, bellowing laughter of his own as he swept in, striking with not only his glowing staff, but with the screaming, flailing body of the Jedi he had caught.
Yes! Use her as a weapon, too! I mean, oh no. How terrible for the Jedi. I mean, kill the Jedi. I mean, what? What?
The silver-hued warrior seemed much less eager to engage Safran during the Astartes' onslaught than his demeanor would have suggested, clenching his teeth in sudden panic as he tried to parry only the stave and dodge the still-living form of his companion. And just like that, he lost. The silver-eyed, many-jointed Knight of Jedi successfully evaded or blocked every strike Safran made without further wounding the Jedi the librarian had been trying to club him with, but had lost that slipperiness that had been saving him from a different kind of attack, as fear and surprise burst the tenuous bubble of his warped defenses. With his last, left-handed swing, the Space Marine tossed the screaming woman towards the man, and instead of retracting his hand, pushed another gout of warp lightning out through it. The howling Jedi was silenced as the bolt tore through her first, ripping up her body, scorching her flesh and robes black even as it tore her apart and sent smoking pieces of the once living Jedi scattering in all directions.
I mean, how tragic. Oh no.
The silver-eyed Jedi lasted marginally longer, catching the bolt on his reddish blade as it rent its way out of the dead knight's mouth. But without his emotions in control, the blade's harmonic ring was not enough to catch it all. The stream of lightning split and burst as it met his lightsaber, burning his hands and chest, causing what little focus the warrior had mustered to flee him. His saber exploded, and he was sent hurtling back on a horrific torrent of predatory energy. Saved, barely, from the same fate as the woman before him by the intervention of 3 other Jedi. 2 leapt into the path of the bolt, catching it on their own humming swords of light, while the 3rd caught the man, now falling, and kept him from colliding harshly with the ground. Safran smirked as he began to step back. It mattered not. He highly doubted that Xenos would survive those wounds.
That's right. Kill the alien.
The Jedi poured in from around him, moving in streams, leaping and spinning in apparent extravagance. But he knew the truth. They were using their Jedi precognition, waiting for an opening to appear, circling instead of driving in for fear of dedicating to a hopeless assault. He was as an ocean predator, surrounded by a shimmering shoal of desperate fish. Safran's smirk grew all...
Yes, a sea of fish wishing for a piece of meat while the giant predator eats.
All the wider as he sent out his mind, as before, probing for the weakness he sought. This time, it was not long before he found one, a Jedi who felt fear. Without warning, he launched himself into the wall of bodies and blades, Force Stave leading the way. The Jedi bared their teeth against him, sabers flashing, and he caught them on his Force Stave, pulling on the warp to draw those strikes that would have gotten around his guard into the body of his weapon, jostling the Jedi horde as he shoved them away. Their varied bodies flew and spun, some landing back on the floor far below, and some falling back towards the ceiling they dueled on. Either way, they were no longer shielding his target, a single brown-eyed Jedi man. "Saras, look out!" called another Jedi, a woman robed and veiled so heavily that only her face was exposed. Her warning came too late. Safran was upon him in the blink of an eye, swinging down with his stave with both hands. The Jedi raised his saber, legs too stiff to dodge, nerves too frayed to parry. He retained the sense to strengthen his arms and shoulders as he attempted to absorb the metal-shattering force of the librarian's strike, but had neglected his legs, expecting his wide stance and athletic body to bear the weight of the blow. Instead, his shins shattered under him, and he roared out a scream of blood-bleaching pain.
Yes!
Falling up into the air instead of collapsing beneath the haft of Safran's weapon, the focus which had bound him to the ceiling breaking along with his legs. Safran reared his stave back and went to swat the man, only for a blue blade to flash before his eyes, colliding with the stave as he swung and delaying its passage long enough for the struck master to fall safely past. The librarian glared as his eyes followed the blade back to its owner.
Obi-Wan! I mean... Oh! Obi-Wan. Ben Kenobi.
As the man called Saras fell, legs flagging in the air painfully, keening the whole way down. He and the saber both were caught mid-descent by the same blonde man who had confounded him before. Saras was swiftly added to a growing line of wounded and dying Jedi who were being frantically tended by two others of their order. Safran decided they should tend no longer. As the other Jedi rushed towards him, blades of light cutting a path to the Space Marine, he leapt again, aiming for the line of the wounded. He fell to the steel deck plates like a psychic comet, smashing the metal beneath him and rising almost without pause, rearing to strike the first of the Medicaid knights with an empowered swing of his staff.
Yes!
His target fell back, eyes wide with fear, helpless before him, and lucky that stronger warriors were nearby. His blow was intercepted and halted by the blades of 3 nearby Jedi, their quivering sabers intersecting the haft of his force weapon. 3 sets of eyes glaring in determined defiance of him.
Kill the Jedi. Sorry. I'm letting my factual opinion get the better of me.
The old man named Sin Draelig was to his left, his single green blade held in a dual defensive grip. His young female student stood to the Imperial Psyker's right, using 2 emerald shafts of light in place of 1 to help hold up the killing blow. And then there was the man directly beneath his staff, brazenly standing above and before Safran's intended target, sky-colored eyes still blazing in the sparking, screeching light of his blue sword. The man used only 1 hand to hold up the Imperial's attack, arm trembling as he thrust his free fist into Safran's chest. The blow carried with it a stream of raw concussive force, and the librarian was sent skidding back. Safran would have rebounded towards the 3 interlopers, but the sudden rain of falling Jedi all around him caused him to disengage. Attention redirected to the many new opponents rushing to face him. Safran could not help but reflect as he began to pound into the wall of sabers that now assailed him. He had been a librarian of the Crimson Razors for nearly 3 centuries. And despite the falling prestige and regard his brothers afforded the Librarius and Psykers in general, his record had been one of undeniable progression in both power and feats. Now he stood as an epistolary of his chapter, and in his long years of service he had been gifted with the privilege of battling and besting many foes in the Emperor's name. In fact, it had become an intellectual hobby of his to study his enemies and, when combat was joined, compare them to one another. So it was with the veritable swarm of Jedi he now faced. The brilliant, crackling stave he bore was little more than a glowing blur which danced across and around his body. So many radiant blades attempted to fall upon him again and again, and it was not but his motion and the maneuvering of his weapon that kept him a step or 2 ahead of death's luminous reach. Their numbers and the nature of their weapons made them challenging opponents, like Eldar in many ways.
Yes, and the Jedi must never be trusted, for they are like the Eldar. Mysterious, backstabbing, and liars.
Their movements were quick, flowing, and martial, their combat forms nearly artistic, causing them to dance and leap about like performers on a stage. Yet, the Eldar wore Wraithbone battle suits and dedicated their minds and souls to the varied arts of killing and war. These Jedi wore nothing but robes, relying solely on the warp to augment their strength and speed. Had he been facing this many howling banshees, or this many Tyranid warriors, or even this many Kroot shapers, he would not have stood a chance, not without great use of his cunning. But the fact that he was even contending with this many of their number spoke to how unprepared they were for the kind of war he sought to bring them. To add to that, their strikes were fundamentally flawed. Most aimed at disarming or delimbing him in place of pursuing lethal blows. Some of the warriors before him seemed to not suffer from this handicap, but they were in the minority. It would have been infuriating, like fighting a foe who could not take you seriously, were it not backfiring so spectacularly. Slower, less determined.
Yes, and there's that smug prick Yoda there. Oh, to destroy the Jedi and to lay fire to their temple. I mean, never.
Determined and less lethal, the only things they had left in their favor was their weaponization of the warp and the burning touch of their unique weapons. The varied aliens of the Jedi attempted to grab him, shove him, and bowl him over with the warp, and many times he did not require the use of his own powers to negate those effects. His suit of tailored powered armor proving sufficient by one means or another to nullify all but the most hard-fought efforts. He had taken this to mean that their psyker arts were woefully underdeveloped. However, as the battle dragged on, he soon saw that this was not quite the case. Being an epistolary of his librarius, Safran knew his endurance was easily twice that of a typical librarian, and that he could project his psychic might in impressive, if specific, ways. Yet,
I'm liking how the librarian is breaking down and calling out the Jedi. This is great. He's showing respect to them. Respect. That's as far as I'm willing to go for the Jedi.
Yet even he was feeling the use of his powers weighing on him, his exertions costing his body more and more with each deployment of the warp. Aggravating this, when he reached out to crush the jumping and dodging forms of the Jedi, smiting them with bolts of power or some other psychic aggression, he found the Republic Psychers to be slippery, somehow sliding past the effects of his powers more often than not. His glowing body began to fade as sabers struck his few openings, forcing him to divert his power from the projection of might to the defense of his sacred armor. Again and again they harried him, issuing forth columns of pure force, which he resisted each time he could. Yet, as sweat gathered on his brow, the ones attacking seemed no more drained for the effort they had put forward. Their warp arts were not weaker, but fundamentally different. Bellowing out a wordless challenge, Safran swung right, catching one of the leaping Jedi in mid-flight, breaking his ribs and sending the warrior hurtling away. "Whoville!" yelled Master Sindralig. The elderly warrior leapt, spinning over the librarian to draw his attention away from the collapsed knight. As he passed overhead, he delivered a silken stroke to the Space Marine's head with his saber, the motion as gentle and smooth as the act of dragging a feather through the air. It was a masterstroke, passing neither too quickly or too slowly, falling at just the right moment to connect. Yet, the blade never touched Safran or his armor, skidding across a barrier of blinding light, an armor-mounted refraction field which the epistolary woke with a simple thought command. Sin grimaced, but remained serene as he landed, the Marine spinning to meet the Master with his staff. The other Jedi backed away somewhat, getting out of the Master's way as they reoriented their attacks to flank Safran while Sin engaged him directly. In response, the librarian drew in his power and sent out his thoughts, allowing his soul to temporarily permeate the metal of the floor panels around and behind him. When next he sensed the Jedi drive in for him, Safran opened his eyes wide, the blue rings there flashing golden as the metal suddenly became bright as the sun and splashed outward in a molten cascade. Most of the Jedi seemed to sense the danger before it occurred, retreating before the metal reached them. Not so with Seer Junda, whose aggression had overtaken her intuition. She screamed, robes catching fire as the splash washed over her. Still crying out in rictus pain and thrashing wildly, Seer was pulled away by the others of her order and tended to by those among them who knew the healing arts. Meanwhile, Safran did battle with the old.
You know, a fan was too much time. You are an outstanding storyteller. I really gotta say, you have really outdone yourself with every single episode, but this is really showing the power of a Space Marine Psyker. Not just a regular Imperial Psyker, but a Space Marine Psyker. And the danger that they truly do pose on the battlefield. And really how the Jedi are ill-prepared against something of this nature. Obviously, I know that a Jedi are a force of good. Ugh. I vomited in my brain. I had to say something nice about the Jedi. Ew. Ew. But, and the key word is but. But. It is showing the struggle that they have to face off against an opponent that is really not of their of what they're used to facing off against, and they are holding their ground pretty well. So, a fan was too much time. You're one hell of a storyteller. Keep at it. Very curious to see where this goes, because right now the rest of the series is brand new. Now, I've mentioned before, I did watch Star Wars versus Warhammer, at least for the most part, for season 1 and a little bit of season 2. But then after a while, like, work, real life, and other issues, I'm gonna keep my other personal stuff out of the way. Got in the way, but it's good to be revisiting the series, and I gotta say, I am pleasantly surprised at just how good you are. So please, folks, support the original content creator. Let's enjoy the rest of the video.
Master, knowing his technique had allowed him to isolate Dreylig for a few precious seconds, though not without cost. The refraction field generator in his armor was smoking, overloaded, as the Jedi Master before him took the half-second of distraction the technique had cost Safran to strike several more times. While the Librarian had blocked 3 of the 5 strikes, the Knight had managed to score 2 more blows, driving the Epistlery's sacred shield into rest once more. The act frustrated the Astartes. This man was far more skilled than the majority of warriors around him, and so he gave the Jedi his full focus as he drove in with his staff. Despite being dressed in nothing more than robes, and armed with little more than a sword and the warp, the man comported himself well. But not well enough, for Dreylig soon found himself facing an overwhelming force he could not counter. The Librarian's strength was brutal, mechanical, and anything less than a perfect parry, a perfect deflection, would lead to disaster. Sin found himself challenged like never before, yet his saber was not found wanting, each parry meeting the force stave with just the right amount of might, sliding past with the perfect amount of speed. But as he focused on the stave of the Marine, remembering the lessons of Darth Maul and his saber staff, the Jedi Master would neglect the Marine's actual hands, a mistake which cost him the battle. He locked Safran's weapon perfectly, catching it such that to shift it away would allow the Jedi a killing blow, only to suddenly feel the Marine's free armored fist driving into his stomach with the force of a speeder bike.
Yes!
Despite the defensive sheath of the force which coated the man, flesh bruised, organs bled, bones shattered, and the Jedi Master was sent breathless from his feet and into the air. But
Good.
Safran did not pause to savor his victory, and before the wind had been driven out of the Jedi's lungs, the Librarian had already wheeled around, now striking at the head of a Rodian, a would-be hero attempting to avenge the Master's defeat. The blow was only somewhat softened by the intercession of a blue lightsaber, aid from a fellow knight who leapt between them. The blonde man yet again. Unconscious instead of dead, the Jedi he struck fell away and fell out of Safran's thoughts, the Marine already turning and jumping into the air to avoid a flurry of multicolored blades. He roared, slapping his staff down as he spun above them, and being countered as 3 more swords of light rose to catch his weapon.
Jedi, die!
The Space Marine pressed against them, using the Jedi to support his weight as he hefted himself over the warriors who had encircled him. With a heave, he pushed himself away before stomping down, his mind pushing as he issued forth a shockwave of broad, wall-like force which left none standing within 8 feet of him, slippery or not. His preternatural eyes swept the assembled Jedi and spotted a flaw, their weakest link, who had collided with a steel pillar and staggered forward, dazed and clutching his bald head. Safran extended his hand towards the man, making a claw and slashing the air, tearing rents in the fabric of space-time, and allowing ruinous energy to pour forth as writhing bolts of living lightning. The Jedi brought up his saber staff, yellow blades catching 4 of the 5 bolts as he spun his weapon like the rotors of a heli-flyer. The final bolt caught his left arm, causing the Jedi to cry out in obvious and abject pain. Though, to his credit, he did not drop his guard or die, even as half the mass of his struck limb came away as bloody ash. Safran clenched his teeth in frustration, readying another volley to finish the Jedi, but was forced to relinquish his pursuit when another warrior rebounded from the librarian's shockwave, rushing in to meet him. The man held 2 sabers at once, and was one of the Jedi who did not suffer from their weakness of compassion. Each strike this warrior made was fully intended to kill the Imperial, not maim him.
Obi-Wan!
Your madness ends now!
Silence, Obi-Wan, you will die!
The Master bellowed, whirling like a death cult assassin. The Crimson Razor's epistolary focused, intent on not allowing the same mistake as before to foul his technique. This time, as the Jedi Knights charged him from all sides, with Master Malicos leading from the front, Safran chose a different tactic. He drank in the warp once more, siphoning it into his body and mind, flushing himself with it. His already prodigious strength and speed increased to absurd levels, something he displayed as the Jedi all closed in. The Astartes Psyker became a blur of motion, the Immaterium spilling out from him and violating the very laws of reality itself. He blocked, dodged, and countered, dedicating himself fully to defense as he remained within the center of the storm of Jedi who raged around him. He knew he could not last, knew he had put himself into a grinder, and that he could exist no more than a few seconds under such a prolonged assault. But he only needed a few seconds. Catching one of Malicos' sabers on his staff, he slid the blade of light down along the weapon and into the path of another Jedi. Neither one of them was quick enough to avoid what would happen next. Jedi Knight Travis screamed, his arm coming away in a jagged cut as Master Malicos' lightsaber was maneuvered into him. Malicos and the others were stunned by the sudden turn, affording the librarian the opening he had been waiting for. Safran released his staff from his left hand, swiping it out wide with his right arm while his left arm extended out to grasp one of the leaping warriors by the collar. His right-handed swing screamed through the air before it connected with Master Malicos, but was parried again. This time, however, the Jedi...
By the way, I see made by fellow fan Kubrick Kurtikow. Many thanks, my friend. All outstanding work showing the glorious power of a space marine librarian.
I was caught utterly off balance, throwing the Psyker swordsman he had struck back several feet and leaving him gasping for breath as he cradled the arm he'd used, the limb now broken. The one he had caught in his left hand made to take off his arm, but Safran never paused to give her the time to act, throwing the Forceborn warrior into the metal ground and swinging down his stave to crush her flat against it. She was saved from an insect's fate as an airborne blue sword of light intercepted the librarian's strike and managed to resist and divert his strength away to one side. Yet even so, the Jedi on the ground was clearly not fit to fight any longer, and as such, was forgotten less than a second later as Safran continued his ceaseless assault and counter-striking. The golden glow completely faded from him, the power needed for it expended as 2 more sabers glanced off his back, reflected by the power of the librarian's mind alone. Safran could feel acrid sweat stinging his eyes and running down his face, could taste it. He had not been made to dance this long in many, many cycles, and while the Jedi were sorry foes for him individually, they were just challenging enough to make him wary. Very few of their number remained after 5 minutes, and fewer still after 7. But it was at the 8-minute mark that Safran truly realized that something was horribly amiss. Frustratingly, the answer to what exactly that was managed to elude his cunning for a shamefully long time.
Come on, Emperor. Guide the Space Marine Librarian to victory.
He was winning. He could feel that, see that. And yet, somehow, he was losing the sense that he had control of this fight. But why? From where was this sensation coming? The Space Marine reared up before stomping down his leg, quaking the entire orrery and shaking most of its occupants to the ground as his soul struck the metal of the ship, ringing it like a bell. The disturbance sent the remaining Jedi stumbling, a stagger he hoped to turn into a massacre, bursting the metal around those who surrounded him with a pained flex of his thoughts, molten metal spilling out from where they stood. Infuriatingly, only one was caught this way, the others leaping away ahead of the sprays, and the single struck Jedi also leapt away and pulsed, releasing a wave of force from their body which freed them from the searing grip of the molten steel. Though none of them had died from that attack, the others were slow to approach, likely wary after seeing their stricken compatriot limping away, or, more accurately, the many deep burns which raked over their smoking body. Taking that moment to backtrack and look around, Safran scanned his enhanced eyes from side to side. The groaning, slumped forms of the Jedi he had been battling lay scattered about the enormous room, some lying where they dropped, others leaning or sitting against pillars or walls. And he saw for the first time that nearly all of them had managed to remain alive. The epiphany sent shards of ice into the veins of the venerable warrior. He briefly wondered if it was possible that he had been holding back, restraining himself without realizing it. The thought was laughable. When it came to dealing death, Safran barely understood the meaning of restraint. Growling like a canid, he shoved forward his palm in an exertion of power, blowing away the scant few combatants which yet remained before him. Two were taken into the walls by the sudden outpouring of force, and fell with heavy thunks, crushed but breathing, to the metal deck. In that instant, as he looked over who remained, both his mind and eyes simultaneously understood the true threat he had been facing, and that the battle would only earnestly begin now. In his memory, he could see it, the factor, the difference between the Jedi who had survived here and the Jedi he had murdered in the past. A single blue blade.
Obi-Wan, it's always been you. You! The unworthy. I mean, no, Obi-Wan's a great character. I mean, I would never try and destroy Obi-Wan. No. Obi-Wan needs to die.
Each time he had made to kill one of the Jedi, there had been a chance it would appear, saving his victim from certain death by interceding in the last possible moment. Safran had wounded, he had maimed, and indeed, many would yet succumb to the damage he had dealt. But few lay still, never to rise again, as he had been denied by the blue blade his rightful glory. And there, before him, not in his memory, but in the sight of his true eyes, stood the bearer of that blade. A Jedi Knight, a human man. He had seen him time and time again, but only now took true notice. The Jedi looked grim, yet not unkind. His azure eyes were fierce, but his posture remained defensive. And unlike most of his kin, he wore armor and a soldier's determination. Despite having intercepted many of Safran's
Obi-Wan Kenobi. There was a time once, long ago, in my youthful naivety, I saw you as somebody to stand by. Now you die, Obi-Wan.
His own blows, he had never chosen to engage the Astartes himself earnestly. He had, the librarian realized.
I'm just kidding. Okay, look, folks, listen. I love being biased to the Imperium. Obi-Wan's a good character. But he must die at the hands of the librarian.
Been allowing the knights around him to wear their opponent down, while he busied himself with denying Safran the death he sought to unleash on them. The old Marine felt himself almost blush. What an oversight! The last pack of Psyker warriors had contained nothing like this man, and so Safran had failed to truly see him and what he represented. The jibes he would receive from the Marines of the Skywatch, should he ever be unlucky enough to encounter any who knew of this, would be never-ending. However, this was now at an end, something Safran made known to the man as the massive librarian oriented his stance in the Jedi's direction. The blue blade-wielding master seemed to notice the change and raised his free hand, drawing the attention of the remaining Jedi he fought beside. "Sarah, hold back now. Gather your strength and tend to Master Drelig," he said. You can't be serious," the knight named Sarah said, panting hard, her arms drooping as she tried to hold a combat stance, her twin sabers of green humming beneath her. The Marine grinned at the two Psyker warriors and began to stride forward, heavy, smoking boots thunking loudly against the floor. "I am, and I have no time to argue. You are exhausted and you are not yet Master Draelig's equal. Go to him, make sure he lives to finish your training," said the blue-eyed master. Sarah hesitated, saying nothing, but reluctant to admit defeat after having made it so far. Safran did not slow. "Now, Sarah!" the master snapped, and that seemed to be enough to push her to obey. She gave a quick nod, deactivating her blades and turning back to run to her master. Safran nearly went to pursue the woman, but was held back. Seeing the remaining Jedi's stance shift subtly, and feeling the cold promise of a sudden premonition. Had Safran given chase just then, the night before him would have destroyed him in 40 of 78 futures. Perhaps an intricate deception by the Jedi he now faced. Some form of warped trickery Safran had yet to encounter. But just the chance that such futures could have come to pass was enough to give the veteran Astartes pause.
No!
You are skilled in the art of defense. Defense of others and defense of yourself. The Blood Angels would likely value such arts as those you display.
Don't give those words to Obi-Wan. He has no idea who Sanguinius is. And Obi-Wan, like the arrogant prick that he is, would mock Sanguinius. Obi-Wan Kenobi has no honor. I don't trust the Jedi. Sorry, folks. I don't trust the Jedi.
Librarian said, edging to the left of the man, watching as the warrior before him moved to the right in response. Safran eyed the warrior up and down, absorbing the details of his movements, learning him even as he did the same back. The Jedi grinned a sour smile at the librarian, sweat sheening his face as well. Clearly, part of the reason he had not engaged Safran was because simply defending his comrades had been all he could manage to do without exposing himself to the very danger he sought to mitigate. Had the man borne the benefits of powered armor, had he been a space marine himself, his potential would have been catastrophic. As of now, it was just enough to make Safran eager for the contest that was about to begin. Normally, I'd take that as a compliment, but coming from people like you, I'd prefer to remain as unvalued as possible.
Of course, because you're a freaking Jedi, Obi-Wan. Ain't no value with the Jedi. Ain't no value with you at all. Same thing with that fraud Skywalker. Both of them.
No offense, the Jedi said in response to the Imperial, spinning his blade up and over his head, his offhand aimed towards Safran, 2 fingers extended.
That is a pity, Jedi. You are human. I can smell this, see this. There may be much we might learn from one another. If you submit yourself before the Emperor, I cannot promise safety for your Xenos associates, nor kindness to your apostate witches. But there may be a place for you and your skill if you show the wisdom to submit,
said Safran. The Jedi scowled, and Safran wrinkled his nose in a cruel smile. They both understood that the Marines' play at civility was all but an open insult. Thanks, but I think I'll pass. I've only ever had one place, and trust me, if you are any indication, then your Emperor would make a lousy Jedi.
Oh, please break Obi-Wan in 2. What? I'm not a Jedi supporter, guys. I don't like the Jedi.
I doubt the Council would allow him to join the Order, so it's out of the question that I could train him. Safran bore a hideous grin and stepped closer, hatred pouring from the Astartes in nearly palpable waves.
I doubt you could train the least of my brothers, even were you willing. However, I am not such a miser as you.
He growled, drawing in the warp, his battle-crafted flesh tensing within his armor as he filled himself with the ruinous powers of the Immaterium.
Come closer, Jedi, and I'll teach you something new.
What? No!
Mace looked around at the survivors of his assault. Jedi lay about him, their bodies mingled with those of the choir they had come to silence and their ample guards. Most
Yes, Mace Windu. Jedi Master.
of his order yet lived, but those who remained had suffered terribly at the hands of the Imperials. Here, Master Windu had discovered that, to the Imperium, those skilled in the use of the Force were little better than communications relays and weapons. This had been demonstrated with horrifying potency during his attack on their communications hub, where Force sensitives called astropaths sent telepathic communications to and from different choirs. The astropaths of the Imperium had not been civilians or non-combatants, however, and the moment Mace and his warriors entered the room, they turned their wretched minds upon the Jedi, confounding them, invading their souls, and sickening their thoughts, making them vulnerable to the average soldiers who had been ready and waiting to defend their astropaths. While the battle had not been a slaughter, he could now count the Jedi who could continue to fight with him on one hand. The rest were either too wounded, needed to help the wounded, or were simply mentally shattered by the odd, thought-rending techniques used by the choir's most powerful members. The sight of their gibbering lips, pale faces, and trembling eyes still haunted the Master.
Come on, Psychers, come on, crush the Jedi!
And would haunt him for as long as he lived. Beneath his boot, the last of the insane Imperial Force users breathed his last wretched breath.
No!
Finally going still and remaining that way.
No!
The wounded helped each other up, limping and staggering their way back towards their dropships, evacuating to await rescue by the Republic, or for the Imperial ship to fall properly into their hands. The sight was equal parts humbling and infuriating. Windu had long considered the Sith to be the only possible competitors with the Jedi when it came to their use, knowledge, and power with the Force. But how certainly could he assert that now, after all of this? This new faction was not only a powerful martial threat, but a metaphysical menace as well. He felt a hand come to rest on his shoulder and looked back, seeing what remained of his strike force. Jedi Master Depa Billaba met his eyes, her steel serene gaze only slightly tainted by the thin light rings of red and orange which circled the very edges of her eyes. Like the embers closing around a burning leaf, subtle but still there. He did not doubt that he had the same look in his own eyes, if not worse, for he and she had used Vapad this day, and used it excessively to survive. Though physically unharmed, they were both spiritually drained. But Windu was under no illusions, and the battle was far from done. All over the ship, the strike forces of the Jedi were encountering resistance, the Imperium having neither adapted to their assault or deployed adequate forces to stall or counter them.
Adequate forces to stall and counter you. They're still alive. Come on, where's an Imperial strike force when you need it?
Many strike forces were now broadcasting distress throughout the ship, some more intensely than others. Now freed of their primary objective, and needing to link up with a larger force, it was time he and his found a group nearby to aid and ultimately lead to the bridge. Depa's grip tightened slightly, and he laid his hand over hers, giving a squeeze of his own, letting her know he was still present, still thinking. Looking beyond her, he could see Jedi Master Nu standing straight-backed, a long, rectangular box slung over her shoulder on a strap. Behind her approached the lumbering form of Master Tapal, and nearby, Master Ali stood up from where she had been tending to a fallen knight. Including himself, that left just the 5 of them ready to move on. "We must keep moving, Master Windu," said Jaro Tapal, the Lasat's muscles rippling under his armor, the predator within him having been awakened and working since the battle had been joined. "Yes, to the bridge," Depa said, withdrawing her hand from Mace's, her other hand gripping her still lit lightsaber all the more tightly. "Unwise," said Master Nu. The elderly woman kept her face stern yet impassive as she continued. "We are vastly depleted. Going straight to the bridge would leave us at a severe disadvantage, especially considering that their defense of that location should be about equal to the defense of this one," she said. Depa grit her teeth, but Windu raised his hand, forestalling any response.
Come on, Windu, please be stupid. Come on. The Imperium beckons you. And finally educates you Jedi for the filth that you are.
Master Jocasta Nu is correct, he said. "Let us rendezvous with another strike force, a potent one. Then we can take the bridge in one push." Depa frowned at first, but smiled at the idea of taking the enemy's command position in one violent strike. Though Mace empathized, he could still not help but worry. Depa, all of them in fact, had seen too many Jedi be broken to not be affected by it. They were all coping in their own way, many Jedi resorting to liberal flash burning of their memories. But even among them all, he and Master Billaba were at special risk. He hoped she remembered that as they moved forward. "Very well, I believe we were relatively close to Master Kenobi's strike force," said Master Ali. "They will do nicely. Well done. Let us contact him and set up a meet," said Master Windu, closing his eyes, turning within himself, and then without. They all paused with him, reaching out with their minds and seeking Obi-Wan and his group. What they sensed a moment later shocked them all. Those lightsabers which had not been ignited now sprang to life, and the Masters opened their eyes. "What do we do?" asked Master Ali. "The answer is as clear as the path laid before us. We go to them, we confront whatever menace this is, and we fight," said Master Tapal. Jocasta and Depa both looked towards Mace, who only hesitated for a fraction of a second before giving a stiff nod. As Master Tapal said, "Let us go, now, before it is too late."
Well, I gotta say, a very interesting battle and a very interesting fight. I have to say, I am thoroughly impressed with the Jedi and how they held their own against a Space Marine librarian But nonetheless, all must be crushed under the jackboot of the Emperor and his glorious Imperium and his ever-truthful angels. The violent strike by the Republic and the Jedi and its clone forces will be met with righteous fury, for the Imperium has committed no crimes at all. The Imperium is innocent. The Imperium is glorious. But, you know what else is glorious? Please, 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 please support the original content creator. It's the right thing to do. It's the one thing to do. And I expect all you lovely, beautiful, hip, cool cats to do that. So please support the original content creator. It's the right thing to do. It's the one thing to do. And one day, we will overcome the Jedi filth. As we should all the time, every time.